In the last lesson, you learned how to read the map of the exam so the topics stop feeling random and start feeling intentional. And now it is time to turn that map into a spoken plan you can actually follow. A study plan sounds like a schedule, but what you really need is a repeatable way to learn that works even on days when motivation is low and life is busy. Because this is audio first, the plan has to fit into moments when you can listen, think, and rehearse ideas out loud, even if you are not sitting at a desk. A beginner-friendly plan also has to protect you from two common traps: cramming too early and wandering too long. The goal is steady progress that builds confidence, not heroic last-minute effort that creates stress. Along the way, you will also build an exam day mental model, which is just a simple set of rules you carry into the test so you make good decisions under pressure. If you finish this episode with a plan you can say out loud and a mindset you can rely on, you will be much harder to knock off balance. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at SecOT.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A spoken study plan begins with the idea that learning is not the same thing as exposure, because hearing a term once is not the same as being able to explain it. Beginners often mistake familiarity for mastery, especially with OT terms that sound technical and intimidating. A spoken plan forces you to turn passive listening into active understanding by making you talk back to the material. The simplest way to do this is to treat every concept like something you must teach to a friend who has never heard it before. When you can explain a topic in a calm, plain way, you have the kind of understanding that survives reworded exam questions. This is why your plan should include short moments of recall where you try to restate concepts without looking anything up, then correct yourself when you notice gaps. Over time, that pattern builds mental pathways that stay strong even when you are tired. The exam will not reward you for recognizing a term in a list, but it will reward you for recognizing what the term means in a scenario. The next key to a workable plan is choosing a rhythm that fits real life, because an unrealistic schedule is just a way to feel guilty later. A good rhythm has a steady baseline and a few flexible extras, so you still make progress even if a week goes sideways. For example, you might decide that most days you will do one focused listening block and one short spoken recap, and on a couple of days you add a longer review. The specific minutes are less important than the consistency, because consistency is what turns learning into habit. Your baseline should be small enough that you can do it even on low-energy days, and your extras should be optional, so they feel like wins rather than obligations. This matters for beginners because the material is new, and new material requires repeated contact before it feels natural. A plan that assumes instant comfort will collapse as soon as you hit a difficult topic, but a plan that assumes repetition will carry you through. A strong plan also respects the exam blueprint without becoming obsessed with it, meaning you use the blueprint to allocate attention, not to chase perfection. Domains with higher weight deserve more repetitions in your spoken practice, because those concepts will appear more often and must become automatic. Lower weight topics still matter, but you can treat them like supporting roles rather than the main character. A simple way to do this in audio form is to rotate through themes, returning to the big ones repeatedly, while sprinkling in smaller ones so they never feel completely unfamiliar. If you notice that one theme keeps showing up in your understanding, like safety constraints or network segmentation, that is a sign you should rehearse it in multiple contexts. You are not just learning definitions, you are learning how concepts connect, and that connection is what makes exam questions feel predictable. When you plan your week, think of it like building a web, not building a stack of flashcards. The web holds together under stress because each idea supports the next. Now let's talk about how to structure a single study session so it produces learning instead of just time spent. A beginner-friendly session has 3 phases: input, interpretation, and rehearsal. Input is where you listen to the content and let it introduce terms and relationships. Interpretation is where you pause and restate what you just heard in your own words, because restating forces you to choose what matters and what does not. Rehearsal is where you try to recall key ideas later, ideally after a short gap, because that gap makes your brain work, and that work strengthens memory. If you only do input, you may feel productive because you consume material, but your exam performance will not match that feeling. If you add even a small amount of interpretation and rehearsal, your brain starts storing the content in a way that you can retrieve quickly. Retrieval is the real skill on exam day, because the exam is basically a series of moments where you must pull the right concept into view under time pressure. So every session should end with you saying a few concepts out loud, as if you were explaining them to someone else. Another important part of the plan is spacing, which is a fancy word for revisiting topics over time instead of trying to lock them in all at once. Beginners often want to finish a topic completely before moving on, but OT security concepts are interconnected, so your understanding improves when you see the same idea in different contexts. Spacing also prevents the common illusion where you feel like you know something right after studying it, but it disappears a few days later. A spaced plan might introduce a topic on day 1, revisit it briefly on day 3, use it in a scenario on day 6, and then test recall in the following week. In spoken form, this can be as simple as asking yourself, without notes, what a term means and why it matters, and then checking whether your answer is clear. If your explanation feels fuzzy, that is a useful signal, not a failure. The plan is designed to surface fuzziness early so you can fix it before the exam forces you to confront it. You also need a way to handle weak areas without turning them into a source of dread. Weak areas are normal for beginners because the subject is new, and the correct response is targeted repetition, not avoidance. A helpful mental trick is to label weak areas as underpracticed rather than hard, because that framing points to the solution. When you identify a weak spot, turn it into a simple spoken prompt you can revisit, like explain the difference between two similar concepts, or describe the goal of a control in plain language. Then practice that prompt briefly, often, until it becomes boring, because boring is a sign of familiarity. The exam will try to tempt you with answers that are almost right, and weak areas are where almost right feels good enough. Rehearsal turns almost right into clearly right by sharpening the boundaries between ideas. Over time, your weak list should shrink, not because you became smarter overnight, but because you gave your brain repeated chances to retrieve and refine. As you move through the weeks, you should also build a simple self-check routine that tells you whether your plan is working. The best self-check for an audio-first approach is not a long practice test every day, but short moments of spoken explanation where you rate your clarity. If you can explain a concept smoothly, using simple language, and you can connect it to another concept, you are building exam-ready understanding. If you stumble, rely on vague words, or drift into unrelated details, you have found a gap worth closing. This kind of self-check is honest because it does not let you hide behind recognition. Recognition is when an answer looks familiar, but retrieval is when you can produce the answer yourself. The exam rewards retrieval more than recognition, especially in scenario-style questions where the terms are embedded in descriptions. A plan that includes frequent retrieval checks will feel harder than passive listening, but it will produce real confidence. That confidence shows up on exam day as calm, not as hype. Now let's shift into the exam day mental model, which is the set of rules you use to make decisions when the clock is running. The first rule is that your job is not to prove you know everything, but to answer the question that is actually being asked. Many wrong answers happen because the test taker answers the question they wish was asked, usually a simpler one. You avoid that by pausing long enough to identify the target, like most likely cause, best next step, or safest option. The second rule is that OT questions often include constraints that matter more than the technical detail, like safety risk, availability needs, or change control. If you ignore those constraints, you will choose an answer that sounds strong in IT terms, but is wrong in OT terms. The third rule is to treat extreme language with caution, because answers that claim something is always correct or never acceptable are often too rigid for real-world security decisions. These rules do not require you to be an expert. They require you to be deliberate. A strong exam day model also includes a way to handle uncertainty without spiraling. When you hit a question that feels unfamiliar, you should first identify what you do understand, because most questions include at least one anchor you can use. That anchor might be the environment described, the goal stated, or the risk implied. Then eliminate answers that clearly violate the anchor, such as options that would create unnecessary disruption, ignore safety, or skip basic security logic. Even if you are unsure of the perfect answer, narrowing the field improves your odds and reduces anxiety. Another part of uncertainty management is pacing, meaning you do not let one hard question steal time from 10 easier ones later. If your testing interface allows review, you can make a best choice and come back. But even without review, the mental habit of moving forward protects your score. The exam is not designed to be solved like a single puzzle. It is designed to be navigated like a series of decisions. Your calm is a strategy, not a personality trait. You should also adopt a mental model for reading, because the way you read changes the way you answer. A useful approach is to read the last line first, not to skip the scenario, but to learn what the question is demanding so you know what clues matter. Then read the scenario with that demand in mind, looking for constraints, priorities, and key terms that indicate context. After that, glance at all answers once before you commit, because sometimes the best answer is not the first one that feels familiar. If you find yourself arguing with the question, that is usually a sign you are adding assumptions that are not stated. CompTIA-style questions typically give enough information to make one answer best, and your job is to work within what is provided rather than inventing extra details. This is especially important in OT scenarios, where your imagination might add complexity like plant-specific devices or unusual processes. Keeping your thinking grounded makes your choices more consistent and reduces second-guessing. Finally, bring your plan and your mental model together by practicing the exam mindset during studying, not only on test day. When you do spoken recall, occasionally phrase your prompts like exam questions, such as what is the safest action first, or which option best balances risk and operations. This trains your brain to think in the same direction the exam will ask you to think. It also helps you spot the difference between knowing a definition and knowing how to apply it. Over time, you should feel a shift where you stop collecting facts and start making decisions, even in your own practice. That shift is the real sign that you are preparing well for Security OT+, because the certification is testing whether you can understand OT security in context, not whether you can recite a glossary. When exam day arrives, your goal is to execute the plan you already rehearsed. Read deliberately, respect constraints, manage time, and stay calm through uncertainty. If you do that, your score becomes a natural outcome of a clear process rather than a gamble, and you will walk out knowing you performed at your true level.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.